for this funds.
Hi, Tammy. Hi, Orlando. Hi, Luz. Members of the public will be getting started pretty soon, and I'll explain how the meeting's going to work. Task force members who are on, nice to see you. Hang tight. We're just going to wait to see if a couple of more people join. Looks like Karen Zhao has joined. Hi, Karen. Welcome.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Let's wait one more minute and then we'll get started, okay? All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Maybe some other members of the task force will join. If you're not on mute, please do so. Please put yourself on mute. And want to welcome everyone to the third. Jeanette, would you mind hit record? Thank you very much. I want to welcome everybody to the third virtual learning session of the San Francisco Unified School District High School Task Force. This learning session is focused on the topic of pathways, and we'll explain what we mean by that. I can see that we are joined by a couple of members of the high school task force. I see Orlando, I see Luz, I see Karen, and I see Langston is coming on, but can't hear us yet. Looks like he's connecting to audio. So thank you all for being here, and thank you members of the public who joined as well. Tonight's conversation, following pretty much the same protocol we followed for the other two, with one slight difference in the way we're going to do presentations, is that we'll start by providing some context about the work the task force has done to date, particularly the substantive issues that have bubbled up through all of the work that the task force has done. Then we will have expert presentations from two people, Roneeta Guha from Education First and Jennifer Lutzenberg Phillips from ConnectEd. Then we will have an opportunity for some Q&A following those presentations, and then discussion by the task force about what they feel like they've learned and what more they want to learn. At the very end of the meeting, we will have an opportunity for public comment. It's been our practice to do that at the end of meetings. And so we will reserve the last 5 or 10 minutes for that, and I'll explain how that goes. So members of the public, thanks for being here and for your patience until the end of the meeting to offer any comment. Members of the task force, just a reminder of our norms. You've seen these many times, so I won't say them again, but I'll just give you a second to read them. And then a couple of reminders before I get into the substance. I want to remind everybody, if you're wondering about who's on this particular meeting and might have been expecting more people. These are voluntary meetings of the task force, unlike our regular business meetings. They are being taped, videotaped, and the presentations that are part of the meetings will be posted on the task force website. The ones for the videos for the first two sessions have already been posted. These are not decision-making meetings. And in fact, we did not expect to have a quorum at these learning sessions. We don't have a quorum currently, but we've always erred on the side of posting meetings publicly in any case and offering opportunity for public comment to err on the side of transparency. As has been the case, our key contact person at the district, Tammy Benau, is here as well. Thanks for joining, Tammy. And there may or may not be other members of the San Francisco Unified staff joining in. The chat room is set up just for communication with us as hosts, with me and with Jeanette. Since I'll be keeping my screen on, if you really have a question that you administrative question, it'd be great if you could direct that to Jeanette. We're not using the chat for substantive comments. We'll be doing our commenting and discussion live when we get to that point in the agenda. So now I want to share just a little bit of context. As all of the task force members know, we had a process called Looking at Student Journeys. At the top it says LASJ, which surfaced a number of themes. And that was a process that engaged school teams from all of the 17 high schools and involved surveys of 8,000 students, 2,000 families, and a fairly universal sample of staff members in the high schools. It included data from student transcripts from the class of 2022, and it included student focus groups at all of the 17 high schools with discussion with almost 300 students. Through the work that those teams did looking and making meaning of the data, they then brought back ideas to the task force, which really informed what you see on the page here, which is what the task force has identified as key themes to address in relation to its charge as a task force. Now it's the job of the task force to move from those themes to recommendations. We've been given guidance by the superintendent to really pay attention closely to three things. One, that recommendations are aligned to the school district's goal around high schools, which is that there be a substantial increase from 57.5% in June 2020 to 70% in June 2027 of the percentage of students who leave high school career and college ready as defined by the California Department of Education. We've also been asked to really pay close attention to the populations of students who've been historically furthest from opportunity to ensure that they have the supports and programs that they need. And we've also been asked to attend to the fact that resources are not unlimited, and we really need to focus on the question of how we best align our resources to our college and career readiness goals, keeping in particular mind the fact that the district is facing declining enrollment. Through conversation with the task force, we arrived at 4 areas for deeper study, where having done a lot of work looking at what's happening inside of the district, we're now looking at practices outside of San Francisco. So we had a session focused on advising practices. We had one focused on what's known as deeper learning, and we can go to the resources to see what really mean by that. Tonight we'll be focusing on this topic of pathways, and next week the final one in the series will be focused on the question of selectivity as it relates to how students access schools and programs. So for this evening, what we're going to do is I mentioned we have 2 presenters. I'm going to introduce them in a minute. We've asked them, we've had a couple of conversations with them ahead of this evening. We've asked them to present each for 25 minutes. So, but they're going to go back and forth a little bit. And we've asked them to reflect on the Looking at Student Journeys final report, which we gave them access to. And we've asked them to identify school level practices and district level practices that are the biggest drivers of effective implementation of pathway programs. So these are programs in high schools to support students to pursue their passions and their interests, often connected to particular career fields. We've also asked them to think about the question of what are the highest leverage strategies for consideration, and consider what the district might stop doing and reduce doing given constrained resources.
That's it.
After the presentations, we'll have the opportunity for task force members to have some dialogue with the presenters. And then we will then, as a task force, have a brief discussion this evening on what felt like it resonated for you, what feels like it's missing, and what questions remain. So task force members, I would encourage you, whether it's on your computer or on a note page with a pen and paper, just to name those three things for yourself and take notes on them. What's resonating for you? What feels missing from this conversation about pathways? And given what you hear tonight, what questions do you still have? So before we jump in, task force members, I'm going to open up my screen a little bit so I can see video. Any questions from you, task force members, about the process before we get started?
None from me.
No questions, thank you.
Welcome, Vanessa, nice to see you.
You as well. I'll turn the camera on in a sec, thanks.
Yeah, no, you can keep it off until after the presentations, that's fine. So again, I'm glad to see Langston, Vanessa, Orlando, Luz, and Karen. Glad you're all here. All right, so now we're gonna shift gears. So we have two expert presenters this evening, Roneeta Guha from Education First and Jennifer Letzenberg Phillips from ConnectEd. From a process point of view, can I ask that everyone else besides the two of them turn off your cameras? It'll make for a better product to put up on the web afterward that other people can see if we're only looking at their faces and screens during the presentation. So let me do quick introductions. Very excited to introduce both of them. I'd like to introduce Roneeta Guha. Roneeta is a principal at Education First, which is a premier education consulting firm, and she oversees projects and initiatives on behalf of partners throughout the education space and philanthropy, nonprofits, school districts, state, etc. She, prior to being at Education First, she was the vice president for strategy and impact at the Linked Learning Alliance, where she oversaw efforts both here in California and across the country to advance strategic partnerships and to increase the impact of linked learning, which is a research-based approach to college and career pathways that she's going to be talking about. Roneeta has spent time at the Learning Policy Institute, and before that had a long tenure at SRI, where the SRI International Center for Education Policy, where she managed research and evaluation projects for a variety of clients. So Roneeta, we're very excited to have you here. In addition, we have Jennifer Letzenberg Phillips, who is the Director of Learning, Teaching, and Pathway Development at ConnectEd. I realize in the bio we didn't write ConnectEd, Jennifer. I might edit that before we actually post this. So at ConnectEd, which is a national organization promoting linked learning and effective career and technology education. Before, in her current role, she brings significant experience as an educational leader, a student advocate, coach, and literacy teacher. Among some of those former roles that she had was being the vice president of teaching and learning at Envision Schools, and she was a school improvement coach and a content coach in secondary English for OUSD, Oakland across the Bay. She taught high school English on the East Coast in Baltimore, and was an advisor for the alternative school, the Met, in Providence, Rhode Island. You can see in the rest of her bio, her other experiences, and we are very excited to have you here, Jen. So with that, I am going to, actually, let me go back, let me start, start right here. I'm going to be quiet. If you guys would just take a beat before starting, and then I'm going to turn it over, I believe, first to Jen, and I know that Jen and Roneeta are both going to tag team and share their wisdom. So thank you very much, both of you.
We are. Thank you so much for the introduction, Matt. And it's really nice to be here with all of you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about my great life's passion, honestly, which is what we call college and career pathways and the linked learning approach. What we're really talking about is a way of deepening the experience that some of you might be familiar with through things like academies. This approach to college and career pathways is best, I think, in the most distilled version, best described by 4 core components. In this approach, all students receive a rigorous college preparatory core academic experience that they can apply with real world work-based experiences. The academic core is married very, very intentionally and very closely to a sequence of CTE classes that result in industry certifications, post-secondary certifications, or college credit. The two work hand in hand and very, very intentionally aligned. Students also experience a deliberate continuum of work-based learning experiences. They have internships, mentorships, multiple opportunities inside and outside of the classroom to get their hands on professional skills and learning. And perhaps most critically, they experience all of this in a small, attentive, and very supportive, personalized learning environment. All 4 of those together are what Roneeta is going to be sharing with you and what I'm going to be kind of digging more deeply into throughout the next several minutes of our presentation.
Thanks, Jen. And yeah, so thank you to all of you for having me here today. As Matt mentioned, I'm with Education First. I'm in a consulting role, but prior to this, spent many years doing research and evaluation. And so I'm bringing to you my research hat, having led a multi-year evaluation of a major effort to implement college and career pathways in a very systemic way. So Matt, if you can go to the next slide, we can kind of keep going through a couple of these, I think. Go to the next one. Okay, we'll start there. So what I'm going to talk about is this evaluation that we conducted. The James Irvine Foundation launched what's called the Linked Learning District Initiative back in the 2009-10 school year, and actually brought on SRI as the independent evaluator for the initiative at the time. And so I was actually the project director and later the principal investigator. And so I want to just acknowledge that these slides actually come from my former team who are still there. And so just wanted to say these are not my slides. They shared them with me so I could share them with all of you today. And the district initiative included these 9 districts from across California. And the foundation's aim with the initiative was to test this approach of really robust, comprehensive college and career pathways at a systemic level and demonstrate the viability of this approach as a comprehensive way to reform high schools. And so it was really a demonstration project to see if we could support district systems and really sustain multiple pathways within a district system. And so we were charged at SRI with documenting the development of these district systems and how we could strengthen pathways and really also examine student outcomes. And I'm gonna actually spend some time talking about those student outcomes. When we look at these 9 districts, it was really interesting. They really varied in size, in geography. They included rural and urban geographies. High school enrollment in these districts ranged from just over 5,000 at the time in Antioch Unified to more than 185,000 students in LA Unified at the time. And so collectively, this group of districts served over 270,000 students of the nearly 2 million high school students enrolled in California at the time, and that's about 14% of the population. And really all of these districts had a high proportion of students of color and socioeconomically disadvantaged students. So there was a lot to learn from the experience of these districts. Next slide. This is just a little bit of a timeline of what cohorts we were looking at the time. We really closely followed the high school graduating classes of 2013, 2014, and 2015, and we were actually able to track them into their second year of post-secondary if they happened to enroll directly after high school. And so I'll be sharing some of that information with you. Next slide. The other thing I want to make really clear, we talk there, you'll see as I go through the evaluation results, we talk about certified pathways. And this is actually really, I think, important to understand. When we were trying to figure out like what the who we were studying. We wanted to make sure there was a level of fidelity to pathway quality into the 4 elements that Jen mentioned at the beginning. And so at the time, actually, Jen's organization, ConnectEd, and a couple of others were the ones who managed the certification process. And so when we were looking at the impact of pathways on student outcomes, we were looking at those pathways that had gone through a certification process and had been sort of acknowledged as meeting a certain level of quality. And that's really important when we think about the impact of pathways. It can't just be any old pathway. There has to be a level of quality and fidelity to the 4 components to see the kind of impacts that you're going to hear about today. And you'll see that over time, more and more pathways were certified during the initiative. Next slide. So again, we had a couple of goals for this evaluation. One was to document the development of district systems, and we did that through qualitative research. We did hundreds of interviews, focus groups with district and school staff, with stakeholders and with students. And then we also looked at the impact of this approach on end of high school and early post-secondary outcomes through surveys and student level data. Next slide. And so I'm going to focus a lot of the conversation today on the findings from the student outcomes analysis, but I'll also mention the survey and qualitative findings. And just a couple of things to note, like this was a very rigorous evaluation study. We controlled for in that student outcomes analysis, we did control for background characteristics and prior student achievement. The results are based on student level data from all 9 districts. So these are not aggregated. This is based on individual data that we were able to obtain from each of the districts. And again, we are comparing students in certified linked learning pathways to students who look similar in traditional high school programs of study. And we included a number of subgroup analyses that I'll talk about, including students who came into high school with low prior achievement, who had high prior achievement. We looked at gender, we looked at English learners, and we looked at African American and Latinx students as well. So in terms of what we found on the next slide, really positive outcomes on dropout and graduation. So these are all the results I'm going to talk about are statistically significant at a 0.05 level, really robust results. We found that the average student in a certified pathway was 2.1 percentage points less likely to drop out of high school before 12th grade, and 3.1 percentage points more likely to earn a high school diploma within 4 years compared with a similar student in a traditional high school program of study. Next slide. We also found that students in certified pathways earned on average 8.9 more credits than similar peers over the 4 years of high school. So this is actually really significant. This is equivalent to nearly 2 more semester courses over their high school career in terms of the number of credits that they're earning. And then we also looked at college preparation. So on the next slide, you'll see that linked learning students completed 0.9 more A through G semester courses than similar peers in traditional high schools, which indicates a progress toward college readiness. So I know that's a key goal of this task force, is to really get kids more college and career ready. And we think this was partly due to the fact that a lot of the programs of study include the opportunity to access A through G courses. One thing that was really interesting is that linked learning students were equally likely to complete the full complement of A through G requirements for public 4-year colleges and universities, and also had similar college admission GPAs based on CSU's eligibility eligibility calculation, which only includes 10th and 11th grade A through G courses. And so I think one of the things we've talked about as evaluators, that the fact that there isn't that it's equal and not higher on these measures, is that pathway students actually were doing this in the context of having the demands of completing, in addition to the A through G sequence, a career technical course sequence along with A through G. And so the fact that they're doing both and still being just as successful as their traditional peers is really amazing. And then on the next slide, we also, I mentioned we really saw a really big impact on student groups who've traditionally been underserved. And we really wanted to make sure that the overall positive results weren't masking any negative results for students who might be most at risk. And so we found that several subgroups, English learners, African American students, Latinx students, students with low prior achievement who enrolled in certified pathways performed at least as well as, if not better, on measures of credit accumulation, graduation, and indicators of college eligibility compared with their peers in those same subgroups who were in a traditional program. And so just as an example, African-American students who were in certified linked learning pathways earned 15.2 more credits in high school compared with their peers. That's amazing. And then English learners in linked learning were 2.8 percentage points less likely to drop out compared with their peers, and also earned an average of 11.7 more credits than their peers in traditional school. So really impactful results. The results in particular on the next slide are particularly promising, and that's for students with low prior achievement, those students who, this will date the evaluation a little bit. The tests that were used were not the CASP tests, these were the CST tests, like the tests before the CASP. And so what we found is that students in certified pathways whose language arts CST scores placed them in what we called at the time below basic or far below basic categories prior to entering a pathway were 4.5 percentage points less likely to drop out, 7.6 percentage points more likely to graduate, and they accumulated 15.5 more credits and completed 1.7 more A through G courses. So that's really amazing results for that group of students. And so what we note is that the strategy is not only appropriate for low achieving students. The other thing we found in an analysis is that students with higher prior achievement coming in did equally well in pathways as peers. So this is an approach that works for all kids. That's what I really want to sort of convey coming out of this. It really works for all kids. And then the last thing I would want to convey on the next slide is that, again, quality really does matter. All of these results are for pathways that are certified. When we looked at high school outcomes for non-certified pathways, so just any pathway that didn't have like maybe the full complement of the four components, we found much fewer and less consistent positive results. And so program quality ultimately does matter. And I think one of the things that we've been talking about with Matt and Jen is just the robustness and coherence of the program, right? Like giving kids the access to all of these components, not just some of these components, not just some kids getting some things, but it's all kids getting all four of these components in a really coherent way is really important. I also just really want to quickly share a couple of slides from the student survey that we did. And these were surveys of students in certified linked learning pathways in comparison students who are in traditional programs of study. And what's really fascinating here is to see that students themselves self-report on these surveys that they were more likely to improve and make gains in their skills around communication, collaboration, and informational literacy, and also in their ability to navigate career and to be career ready. And similarly, on the next slide, they're also more likely to report gains in measures of self-management and self-efficacy. So, and I think Jen will be talking a little bit about some of those things when we get to her. Really quickly, I also want to just share just some of the early post-secondary outcomes. These were a little less robust, to be honest, and there's potentially a number of reasons. And we actually, one of the reports that I put in the Google folder is a follow-up study that I worked on with the UCLA Center for Community Schooling, where we actually, they interviewed former linked learning students who are in post-secondary about their experiences and their transitions. And there's a lot there to sort of dissect. So I won't get into all of that. I have the report for you, but what we found is that they were basically as likely as similar peers to enroll in college. And if they happened to enroll in post-secondary institution, they were also equally likely to enroll in a four-year college and to persist to into a second year of college. Thanks, Jeanette. On the next slide, I think what is fascinating is that although the findings for enrollment for enrolling in a four-year college aren't significant in the overall sample, it is statistically significant and positive for our African-American students and for students with low prior achievement, which is pretty exciting. So we really do see an impact on some of our subgroup populations. On the next slide, there was one other analysis that the team did, and I'm actually a little less familiar with this because they did this after I left, but they looked at some community college on track indicators to see if students enrolling in community college from a linked learning pathway and from traditional programs, if there was any difference in being on track. And you'll see on the next slide, we didn't see any significant effect. And there was this sort of random finding that students with higher prior achievement were more likely to enroll full time. And so my team was like, that's if they weren't really sure what to do with the findings, so we just threw it in. So anyway, do what you want with it. Next slide, and I think this was actually, Matt, this was a duplicate slide that you can delete when we send this back out again. All right, so implementation lessons for districts. And I think, Matt, this was something you wanted to make sure. I did leave you all a report called, I think it's called Lessons Learned from the Linked Learning Approach. It's also in the Google folder. And so a lot of what's here you can find in there, but I would say a couple things related to, that are really important from the learnings of the implementation of systemic linked learning was that you need visible and public champions from the including superintendent, the executive cabinet, school board, that they need to be really demonstrating their commitment to this approach. And that could be through enacting supportive district and board policies, setting and enforcing expectations for educators, developing data systems to effectively track students, and marshaling funds and resources. And I think part of like what you guys are already doing is also really important. Like, it's really hard to move people beyond sort of outdated notions of career technical education, some, CT for some, college for others, right? And so there really needs to be a robust communication plan about how you are sharing this vision. And the other thing that was really, really important, I think, from the initiative was just district level coaching. There was a ton of work put into coaching, and ConnectEd and Jen's team did a lot of that support. It was incredibly critical to helping to create that common vision and really helping folks build relationships, spread the foundational knowledge of the approach, and really help shift mindsets. And so that was really, really critical. I would say a few other things that were really important was having just a dedicated person with time and authority to oversee implementation of this work. And so most of the districts that were in the initiative and that have continued this work have a dedicated director, a linked learning director, a college career readiness director, someone who is has relative positional authority and might oversee high school principals and has a support team around them, but also is really working closely with the leadership team across the district and not just in a silo. With respect to equity, I think a couple things that were really important. It's really important that students have choice and voice and agency in selecting pathways, but at the same time, making sure that districts weren't unintentionally reinforcing inequities by letting just solely kids choose. And so making sure that there is deliberate choice, but also a real centralized pathway recruitment strategy to make sure that students are actually being distributed equitably across pathways. With work-based learning, I think, again, really important to invest in staff and structures to support the work-based learning component. You cannot do this on the backs of pathway teachers. There need to be additional supports in place, and we can talk about that. And then just a couple other things in terms of district systems. Human resource policies were really important, especially with respect to recruiting and retaining pathway teachers and developing experienced collaborative pathway teaching teams. Giving folks time and space to collaborate was really important, especially around curriculum and project-based learning. And we can talk a little bit about, you all mentioned deeper learning. Pathways are a great way to incorporate project-based learning, performance assessment, capstone projects, portfolios. Most of the pathways we've worked with incorporate that type of deeper learning instructional practices and assessments, but you need time for teachers to do that work really well. And then I think finally, just, having that broad-based coalition that includes not just your school folks, but includes your business partners and civic leaders who can support work-based learning and help develop those partnerships with industry and really provide resources. So that's all really important. And then on the next slide, I also just have some implementation lessons for pathways. And that's one of the things we learned is that I think the initiative didn't pay enough attention to principals. We learned that a little too late. We had coaching for districts, we had coaching for pathway teams, and I think we needed more support for principals, because principals are faced with so many competing priorities. And so, they really needed to better understand why this work was important, why we needed certain structures in place, why we needed to maybe change master schedules to enable student cohorting. So it's really important to get principals on board early, support them through implementation, through coaching and technical assistance, and really hold them accountable. And so there was a lot of, so the districts who really were able to do this well, I think, did a lot of targeted principal coaching and support. And then just making sure, again, that the pathway leads are supported and have dedicated time to fulfill their multiple responsibilities. And that, again, there are site-based or district-based work-based learning coordinators and people. Just the human capital of doing this work is really important. And then pathway level advisory boards have been really important to supporting folks in developing really good, industry-aligned curricula, assessing student performance, helping to identify work-based learning opportunities. And so we learned a lot from this, and happy to, as we get into Q&A, share more about, what we see as having worked or not worked through this multi-year study. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jen to talk about students. And oh yes, I just, again, have to acknowledge my colleagues, Kira Caspary and Mia Werner from SRI. If you have any specific questions about the evaluation, any technical questions, please do reach out to them. They were amazing in letting me share their slides today. And so I'll hand it over to Jen.
Thanks so much, Roneeta. As Matt mentioned earlier, and as Roneeta also just backed up, I work with an organization called ConnectEd, the National Center for College and Career. We were a primary technical and professional support provider during the district initiative, which is the evaluation of those 9 districts in California that Roneeta just explained. That was the district initiative. And since that district initiative, we've been expanding our support across the nation, well outside of California, into the Midwest, the Southwest, the East Coast. We've seen that this approach is one that works really, really well in many different state contexts and local contexts. I specifically am the director for learning, teaching, and pathway development, which means if it has to do with students and student-focused instruction, it's going to be me and my team at ConnectEd that is providing that support. And very, very specifically, the kind of support that we offer is still closely connected to those indicators of quality that we initially discovered and supported in the district initiative. On the next slide, you'll see those particular indicators. We call them the essential elements, and they map very closely to some of the indicators that Roneeta shared, and that we and our subsequent partners have supported in college and career pathways certification process.
Jen, if you could hold on for 1 second, I just want to make sure one thing. Saw a couple of people raise their hand to speak. If you could keep your hand down for the remainder of the presentation, there'll be an opportunity for the task force to have discussion later, and then for the public to have comment at the end of the meeting. So please don't raise your hand during the presentation. We'd appreciate that. Otherwise, we're going to have to just keep lowering hands. My apologies, Jen.
No problem. Thanks, Matt. So these essential elements are, you'll see, great things for students, really, really great things for learning, and not necessarily in and of themselves anything that is specific to college and career pathways only. The difference for this approach has to do with finding ways to get these essential elements to all students in all schools. Without that all-in approach, there's really only so far that a particular district can get in terms of depth of learning and access to opportunity. Next slide. We do take, as a support provider, and again, this is the approach that was also evaluated in the district initiative. We take a systemic approach to college and career pathways. And in fact, we don't just think of that as a support approach. We think of that as the way to high school transformation through pathways. As you heard when Matt was talking through my bio, I've worked as a teacher and administrator in a variety of traditional and non-traditional schools and districts, including some that you probably know about as very pathway-like, very college and career focused. Those alternative schools, alternative approaches to schooling worked really, really well for students. And they, for the most part, operated either as solo schools within a larger district that wasn't following that approach, or as more sort of nimble alternative LEAs that don't necessarily face the same kinds of infrastructure, capacity, community, resourcing challenges that large public school districts like yours do. That's another significant difference to the linked learning college and career pathways approach. This is an approach for existing large traditional schools and school districts that requires systems transformation in a reciprocal way. Next slide. In now almost 20 years of doing this work in public schools and school districts, we know a lot about how that transformation process works, what those phases look like, what the quality indicators are, how to track them, how to build them. We know a lot about the how. I'm not going to get in the weeds about the how with you today. We also know a lot about the what. Roneeta shared a little bit with you about that what. And we have tons and tons of resources if you get curious there. What I did want to do was take a little bit of time today to talk more about the why. I think the why is becoming ever more important right now in our nation for so many reasons. And on the next slide, just to sort of think about that why probably requires us thinking a little bit more about the who in front of us. It's always been pretty obvious that adolescent learners are supported in college and career pathways. I think it's only recently that we're becoming aware of why exactly that happens. I think we know, if you want to click one more time, Matt, that birth to 6 years old, early childhood, most of us know, and we've known for a long time, that that is a very significant time in human brain development. That's when we build our brains. In fact, 90% of our brain growth happens in those years. I think we know less, but we're starting to know a lot more about what comes later. In the next slide, if we think about birth to 6 as building the house of our brain, we really need to start thinking deeply about ages 12 to 19, where that beautiful structure that we built needs to be fundamentally and almost completely gutted and remodeled. That's just the case, and something that we're learning more and more about as technology gets better. This is the time where brain structures that allowed young people to learn kind of explosively and generally, to suck the world in like sponges, which is what we know children do, that brain structure does not serve adults in the very specialized, pruned and finely tuned work of becoming a fully functioning adult, doing the work of adult life, and successful participation in workplace and civic responsibility. So in between that early time and the time of becoming an adult, we need to remodel. And that's what adolescence is all about. Next slide. This really does have some pretty significant impact on the needs and behaviors of young people, of teenagers. In some kind of contradictory and probably very familiar to you ways, if you spend any time with teenagers, you know that they're simultaneously really open to novel thought and creative experience, while also being very, very emotional and impulsive about it. All of that, their attachment to each other, their attachment to peers, a desire to feel purpose and a sense of belonging, to see who they are, who they could become, to be seen in who they might be or who they already are starting to show that they are. All of that is not just a nice to have. This is adolescent brains. It's a need to have. Next slide. I think, especially since the disruptions to life in school that we all experienced during and after COVID-19, it's more and more obvious that students it's not a nice to have to get those needs, those brain needs, those identity and developmental needs met in school. It's a must have. And especially since what all of our young people went through, if that isn't happening in school, the disengagement that students will experience has real consequence for learning and depth. It has real consequence for participation, civic participation, school participation. It has real consequence for physical and mental well-being for our young people. And that isn't just for kids who are not finding themselves successful in school. This is also true, more and more the case, that this is true for students whose GPAs seem like they're doing fine, whose financial backgrounds would suggest that opportunities are all open to them. Those students also are showing us really, really obviously that they need to have their needs met in their school. It was not the case that linked learning and college and career pathways were created specifically to be brain responsive approaches to schooling. In fact, a lot of this research came years after the linked learning initiative and all of this work happened. But it is indeed the case that a lot of what works about the linked learning approach works because of this connection to what adolescent brains need. You can see the explicit connection to industry professionals, to folks in workplaces who can help young people to build a network and a sense of purpose, the very supportive, deliberately supportive nature of small learning communities in college and career pathways, very intentionally designed connections made between learning in one subject area and application in another, the kinds of experiences that students have when they are trying on work-based learning, when they're working on their projects, all of that is very, very significantly felt by students. It's consistently what our students say when they're interviewed, when they're surveyed. Roneeta spoke about one particular survey. This is what students say they loved about linked learning pathways and college and career experiences. Next slide. I did want to show and have included many more such examples in the folder of resources that you can access, but college and career pathways is a very, very intentionally and cohesively designed approach. This is an example of a program of study from Wall-to-Wall Health Academy in Sacramento City. And what you can see here are things that maybe some things don't probably look very unusual to you or different from some things you probably have in place, but then you'll also see some things that probably do look different. And the difference is about intention and depth. So in a college and career pathway that has a health professions focus, you're often going to see that English is now medical English or health English, English in the health professions. That's not all the students are doing. They're doing all of the regular standards-based work of an English class, but they're doing that with a flavor of medical professions that keeps them interested and connected. For kids who have already chosen in to a field that they're curious about, whether or not they end up working in the medical profession, this is something that captures their interest enough to want to do English more. You can see even foreign language in 12th grade can be flavored with medical Spanish, with medical terminology. All of that, as well as the comprehensive sequence of CTE courses that you're going to see in the medical science row of this program of study, and the many, many work-based learning opportunities that students experience in a continuum across those years. That's one piece of the puzzle. Another significant piece of the puzzle you see below this program of study. Those partners are not just a list of folks in Sacramento that are in the health professions. These are the people who show up in kids' classrooms day in and day out. They're helping kids to put together presentations, portfolios. They're reviewing student work. They're building mentoring and internship opportunities. Sometimes they're tutoring. Sometimes they're helping kids to job shadow. There are multiple ways that these partners help not only students, but also help teachers. because it is not easy as an English teacher to imagine the application of your subject, especially if you have always been a person who has been in that subject area. If English has been my profession my entire life, it's hard for me to know without specific help from people in the professions how you would apply the skills of English literacy outside of the classroom. And that's another thing that these advisory boards and partnership panels will do to help teachers make sense of their subject area outside of the walls of the classroom. Next slide. Another critical component of the pathway learning experience is intentionally building a sense of belonging. And you can see in this sense of belonging plan that comes from Claremont High School in San Diego, the ways that this community is intentionally thinking from the first moments that students are invited into their pathway, all through much more comprehensive and curriculum embedded ways to build a sense of professional belonging in participating and growing experiences. You can see a lot of the kinds of strategies that you've probably already thought about and learned about in some of the talks that you've had around deeper learning. A lot of this stuff, student leadership, on-time feedback, exhibitions, presentations, mentoring and support, that is not unique to college and career pathways. The uniqueness here is that all of that work is designed very, very carefully, not only with an industry-focused approach, but that also it is built into a professional set of expectations for students. Next slide. A lot of the long-standing relationships that we've had with districts, this one is from Los Angeles Unified. This is their linked learning portfolio defense. These deeper learning strategies work really, really well in college and career pathways because of the learning environment that's been created. In LAUSD, and in fact, in most of the college and career pathways that we work with, students present their work not only to their peers and their teachers, they also are presenting work to industry professionals, to businesses, to potential partners and networks that they can access later on. These are real world learning and real world presentation experiences where kids learn things like spelling really matters if in fact I'm pitching to a real person who can really give me a job down the road. Next slide. Oh, sorry, I guess I was staying on that slide. That's really what I wanted to say was probably leading us into our next section about questions and answers. There is a level of depth and cohesion in a linked learning pathway environment that I think kind of starts to make the connections for the adults a lot more apparent than it would otherwise be. This is an approach that works for kids, but maybe even more strongly, it's important for me, I think, and for Roneeta, I'm sure we'll also highlight this. This is an approach that also works for the adults. It is really, really hard to make some of these time-tested, research-proven strategies like defenses of learning, like portfolios and student feedback. Those are hard things for teachers to adopt, and they're much harder if the systems, structures, and supports are not present for teachers to have that work done with an efficiency of scale. In this systemic approach, there's support for every level of the district so that those structures are much more available and so that teachers, in addition to students, are supported to try. And that is where I wanted to take a breath to see if my colleague has anything to add or to highlight before we take some questions.
No, you did a great job, Jen. And I think I think your point that like this is really good for kids. It's also really good for teachers and the opportunities to just collaborate and be, I think every teacher we talk to just appreciates the opportunity to learn and grow as a professional because of the collaboration and the sort of the team teaching nature of being in a pathway and working across disciplines.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it is a win. It is a win that I myself experienced as a professional, and it was unimaginable to me to go back to a different way of doing the work. All right, Matt, I think we're going to kick it to you.
Thank you both. And I'm going to actually turn off the presentation. And I'm going to ask if the members of the task force could, if you're in a good place to be on camera, to do so, just so we can see you in conversation with the expert presenters. So this is the period, just as a reminder of that we are going to have public comment at the end of the meeting. So those people who have indicated to us through private chat that they want to give public comment, that will be at the end of the meeting. This part of the conversation is for dialogue between members of the high school task force who are present tonight and the expert presenters who are here this evening. So in addition to our norms task force members, the first time you ask a question, please do us the kindness of telling Roneeta and Jen who you are, so they know a little bit about you before you ask your question. And we'll start with Karen.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for the very informative presentation. Yeah, I am a member of the task force, and I am a parent of an 8th grader in the SFUSD district. And also I'm an educator myself, community college English teacher. When you're talking about English, I was relating to that. So I appreciate that the information you presented, really broke down the components of these pathways that make them successful. I guess the thing I'm wondering about is, I would imagine that also another component of the success, you said that these are for large schools, but I'd love to hear, for example, like if you can give us a sense of the size of, the number of students served in the pathways and the kind of staffing required to make the pathways able to provide all of those great supports that you outlined. Because I know that for myself, seeing what happens in the community college system, we know, what helps students support, what supports student success, rather, a little tired, it's been a long day. But we also know that capacity is a big part of that. And we have something called student cohorts, where certain cohorts of what we target, what we've identified as targeted underserved students get access to programs that have extra counseling support, some of the very similar things that you've outlined in your presentation. But we also know that scaling up the programs and the amount of support that they provide is very difficult to do on a large scale, because it requires a level of staffing that the institution simply cannot financially manage. So if you could give us a sense of this, that capacity of the pathways, the maybe staff to student ratio, how many students are on a pathway at a time, that I feel like that would be helpful context too. Thank you.
Sure, Roneeta, I don't know if you have an answer. I certainly do.
I mean, from a research perspective, like when we were kind of like being like, hey, here's the average number, like we kind of say average of 400 kids, but it could be 200, it could be 600, depending on how big the comprehensive high school is, but somewhere in that range, with kind of, a full complement of academic teachers. I think one of the things that we've seen districts do really well is, there's probably some additional stuff, but some of it's just reimagining your existing staff too and how they're structured. So one example is assigning counselors by pathway and not by kids' last names, right? So that the counselors really get to know the kids in the pathway and can work really alongside the teachers in that pathway. So like, you don't need more counselors, you just need to reimagine how you're organizing them. And so that would be like one example. The other thing is site leadership, or organizing your site leadership, again, not by students' last names, but by pathway. So in like Long Beach, for example, they have a triad model where the leadership team for a pathway is the pathway lead, who's a teacher, a counselor, and like a vice principal. Basically, that's the pathway leadership team. So you're reimagining how you're designing your staffing structures, not necessarily having to add a whole lot of other people. I think the additional the addition to me really is around the work-based learning, because I don't think that can be done within the confines of the existing staffing structure, because you need people who have the time to be reaching out and developing relationships with industry. So that is the one element that I feel like folks have had to find additional resources for work-based learning coordinators. But I think most of the other staffs structures I've seen they've just kind of reimagined their existing staff structure. So that's what I've seen, Jen. I know you've been in sort of other contexts as well, so really eager for you to jump into.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Roneeta just said. We always say 300 to 500 per pathway. In large comprehensive high schools, there's usually 4 to 5 pathways, but more and more, I mean, I do want to correct maybe something that I missaid. This is not an approach that's only for large schools. This is an approach that works in full districts. And more, as we've been moving outside of the California context, we've been taking on some, I guess I would call them hyper rural schools and school districts. Places like Gallup, New Mexico is a multi-year initiative that we've been working on. Actually, we're also in other locations in New Mexico, but in Gallup, that is one of the largest school districts in terms of area, not in terms of student population in the entire nation. Those schools have around 150 to 200 kids total, and the schools themselves are 45 minutes to an hour away from each other in the Canyonlands. These are schools that predominantly serve Navajo and Zuni students in extremely rural conditions on and off of the reservation. They're so rural that in fact the teachers live there in teacherages because you can't commute to these places. You can't leave when it's raining or snowing. And right now, the College and Career Pathways approach that we're working on there is working. It's really like moving my heart even to start talking about it. The staffing shortages are profound in that place, but all of the ways that it works is exactly what Roneeta is just talking about. It's about rethinking how adults wrap around kids. One of the key structures that Roneeta didn't mention, but that is critical in this approach, is thinking about student support as a whole team experience. Usually, teacher teams have a weekly common planning time. They usually spend 1 week focused on the academic and class content, the work-based learning connections, and then they'll spend another week, the alternating week, completely focused on student support. And that student support includes the dean or the AP and the counselor, as Roneeta was saying, who are assigned to the pathway, but it can also include very deeply connected mentors. It can include invested community members. The approach, the net gets bigger, and there are more people who are wrapping around kids. It's also the case, the honest truth is that a lot of the behaviors that you get used to dealing with for kids start to change when they're doing something they care about. And so there also are fewer students that make it to tier 2 and tier 3 in this approach, because there's so much richer tier 1 that's wrapping around kids in that initial meeting.
Thanks for the question, Karen. Other task force members? Orlando.
May I go? Thank
Yep.
you. Hello, everyone. My name is Orlando Leon. I'm also part of the task force. My brief background first is I have a kid at Hoover Middle School. He's entering 7th grade. I was going to say 6th grade, but just as of yesterday, they started the school year. So he's doing well so far. And my brief background professionally, I'm in technology, so software and just overall technology. But I have spent 18 years in higher education, various institutions around California, public and private, and then at the Cal State, which is I think the largest higher ed institution for 4-year degree granting in the United States and maybe the world. I did a lot with student success, so I really appreciated hearing about pathways and retention rates and persistence rates. Those are all resonate very well with me. My main question for now is that, and I'm not sure if you've looked at SFUSD and how much you notice about SFUSD, but I did notice Oakland Unified, which is where I work right now in Oakland, not in the Unified School System, but I'm in Oakland. So with regard to the district strategies, the key success indicators and strategies, you mentioned, of course, going all in would be one part of that, but the others listed on the slides, any assessment or encouragement as to how well SFUSD might fit in those criteria that you put out there? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, are you saying current state or potential?
Well, I would like to understand what it might take to get there. So yes, current state, how would you assess SFUSD is in meeting those success strategies? And then what might it really take? What are the biggest maybe roadblocks that you see?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know all of the answers to your particular context at this moment. What I do know, I think I would say a challenge area that I think you have quite a bit of work that you've done in your district, my understanding anyway, to work on increasing the quality of your academic experiences. I think you have some starting points. Sorry. I'm getting a little feedback, sorry. Some starting points in your initial work in work-based learning and other kinds of opportunities. I'm not sure that sort of intentional sequence or the marrying of those two things is currently in place in your district. I also think that idea of all-in and equity of access is a really, really critical component that I would wonder about. I know that the schools in your district have a lot of different things going on, and that can be a challenge, not just for student achievement, but also, like I was saying before, about kind of an economy of scale for your teacher and your district's learning. It's challenging when there are a lot of different approaches and sort of islands of excellence for people to come together in this approach. So I guess that from what I know, that's what I would highlight. I don't know, Roneeta, if you would add or even challenge anything that I'm saying.
No, I would echo everything Jen's saying and just add that I think, what we've seen as being really important is that common vision, right? Like the stakeholders in that community having a common vision for college and career readiness and saying this is the approach that we think is going to be really really allow for our students to be successful. And so I think the communities in which we've seen this work flourish have come together and said, this is the way we think high school should look for all our kids. And we've seen some real impact. So you mentioned Oakland. Oakland is all in. They are wall-to-wall pathways. Every high school kid in Oakland is in a pathway. They've actually had a 10-year parcel tax to support college and career pathways. So the community has invested in pathways in Oakland, and they've seen a real impact on their graduation rates over the last 10 years. Long Beach too is another good example of a place that is all in. And again, starts with a vision and everyone being on board with that vision. I think you got to start there. I think a lot of these districts have graduate profiles, and so they're aligning. They've got their vision and they're sort of stating in their graduate profile what they want their kids to know and be able to do, and then aligning their pathways to make sure students through those pathway experiences are meeting the outcomes in the graduate profile. So I think starting with that common vision is going to be really important.
Yeah, I know that student choice and voice are another really key piece of this puzzle. In the districts that have gone all in, in Long Beach, in Oakland, Porterville Unified also comes to mind in California. These are school districts that have reorganized how they think about schools so that kids can pick the best fit. And when the student has a passion, they're going toward that passion rather than trying to make the schools all things to all kids and maybe not meeting all of the needs that kids might choose to connect to. So I'm not sure exactly what the current state is in your district, thinking about school choice, student voice, and school options, but that is another really critical piece of the puzzle, because this works when students can make a choice to follow their interests.
Thank you. If I may follow up, that I might have a separate question on that topic, but just as a follow-up to this right here, where what might it take to be successful? You mentioned, of course, the district and staff and administration, but how important is it for parents, perhaps, as part of that equation? Maybe we could throw in school board too, but how important is it for parents to be on board with all of this and support then the district and the direction?
Very, very important. And I would say that in our experience with this, we've seen a lot of different ways that parents can accept and can also push in this approach. In communities where there are very large sort of wealth and success disparities, doing school differently for communities who feel currently served by the schools is a different messaging challenge than it is where where students are predominantly not being served, and where parents feel like the schools have failed. In both cases, there's a lot that can be gained from that approach, but the outreach and how you navigate those communities is different. And we have just many, many examples of work that we've done where there are those big wealth disparities, and also communities where the population is a little bit more evenly, a little more even keel on both sides. Right now we're in North Kansas City, Missouri, which is a fairly high wealth school district. And while there are some small wealth differences in communities, they're not very significant. So messaging pathways to that community who largely feel like their kids are getting enough is really about digging a little bit more deeply into how connected the students feel and how much they feel like school is something that actually matters to them and is getting them to the next level. That's been really what's turned it around in this wealthier place versus in a place like Gallup, where the teachers, where the community just simply feels like their kids aren't, they're wasting their time in schools that didn't serve themselves when they were in school. And, they just feel so disconnected from that community. Different messaging, but, boats are being raised in both places with parents on board.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would completely echo what Jen just said. I think no matter, I think we all want our kids to have a sense of belonging and connectedness. And so even our kids who might be doing well in school doesn't mean that they're necessarily feeling a sense of belonging and connectedness. And so we want to make sure, and I think what we have seen with this approach is that it does bring all kids in and gives them supportive environment and an opportunity to develop and deepen relationships with their peers and with their teachers and feel supported, irrespective of their own background.
Yeah, I will say, related to that, in wealthier communities or communities with very big wealth disparities that we worked with before COVID, it was a little bit of a harder sell to more successful parent communities before COVID than, just to be honest, than it has been lately, because more and more parents of otherwise successful students are seeing a lot of emotional, mental health issues, connectedness issues. And that part turns around quickly in this approach. It's actually one of the first things that changes, both for the students and for quite a few of the teachers. Teachers very often, and again, especially since COVID, have felt really dislocated from the reason they got into the profession in the first place. And this is a way to really bring a lot more professional respect and excitement back into the profession, so that we've actually been finding that a lot easier for the last 2 or 3 years than it was before COVID.
Before we do the next question, Orlando, I just wanted to point you to a couple of things from our conversations that might help kind of inform connecting what you're hearing tonight back to what we've learned in San Francisco. One is Stephanie Lynn's presentation way back on meeting 2, where we talked about the CTE pathways that exist in the district. There's some good information there related to experience that students have and outcomes. And then in the Looking at Student Journeys report, would point to the section on CTE course taking, career and technology education course taking by students, and some of the patterns that you see there. And then I'd particularly point out that one of the reasons why we have focused in on the question of pathways is because of this idea of connectedness to passion, that the survey data that we had indicated that large numbers of students, as many as half of students, indicated that school was not a place where they felt was supporting them to connect to their passions. So those, I think, are data points in what we've done together that you might circle back to as you make the connection between tonight and our internal investigations. So let me turn to
that. Thank you.
I think Vanessa is next.
Thank you, Matt. So really glad to see Roneeta, who I worked with at Sac City when I was director. And I want to just say that, as we implemented the pathways, the linked learning pathways, and the California Partnership Academies, what we found was not only higher achievement and student belonging, but we also found that students attended. Yes. And that they were really increasing their instructional time. Yes. And to your point, that they love being there. I mean, our students were in our pathways after school, before school, summer school. So that is something that I think me and my team were really proud of, and definitely wanted the district to continue to invest in. So I'm really glad to kind of see our work being spotlighted here with Benjamin Health Professions, Marla's campus, which is actually a small school, Karen. So this, what's really nice about linked learning is that it's not really about the school size, it's about the approach. How are we banding different courses to be able to be integrated with career access? And then how do we include the community? So this is a topic that I'm particularly passionate about and definitely want to support in terms of conversation. However, I think in San Francisco, we have a bit of a different opportunity. In Sac City, we had opportunity related to low student achievement. We had low attendance, right? But we had really high investment from our teachers. Our teachers were not being faced with, not being paid, for example, right? There wasn't as much of a housing crisis because in Sacramento, the housing was a bit more affordable. I think in San Francisco, we're faced with several other factors that we're gonna really need to be very deliberate in as we plan. And I think to be able to get to a pathway that is efficacious, to your point, Roneeta, that meets the end of that certification phase, right? Which includes families, it includes parents, it includes community. We have to really think about how do we implement this, and how do we implement this in a way that is sustainable, that is not going to be, a storm of stuff happening for a couple years, right? And all the people that know small learning academies know what I'm talking about. But that can actually be like longstanding. And I think there is an opportunity with City College of San Francisco, given its very strong English department and its focus on career education, that we can really have some good talks about how to do this and how to do this well. I know when Mark Rocha was chancellor, he was really focused on workforce development, and it's such a small city, definitely. And it's not only college or career education, I think it's both. Okay, so I think that is the beauty of linked learning, that young people are learning in both types of learning environments, and that they're also getting support services such as tutoring, mentoring, that they're able to participate and be a part of exhibitions. We had several exhibitions in the year at Sac City. So I'm really excited about this conversation, and I just want to let my my task force colleagues know that if there's any questions that you have, I have a lot of the stuff that we worked on at Sac City. Happy to share that with you, Matt. But just wanting to make sure that in this case, the how is really important. And for this city, the how is important. So thank you so much. Great to see you, Roneeta. I'm happy that you're moving on there. And
thanks so much, Vanessa. It's so great to see you.
For sure. Okay.
You guys are really lucky to have such a great resource like Vanessa on your task force. And I would just echo what you said, but also just say, a couple things. What I didn't say earlier, and it goes a little bit back to what Jen was saying, like the opportunity for students to develop social capital through work-based learning opportunities and make connections to industry partners and mentors is so important. And you'll see in a lot of the research I dropped for you how important those connections have been for students, the experiences and just the connections for like their future career opportunities. And so again, as you're thinking about how you're communicating this to different families, like all kids need access to that kind of social capital is really important. So thank you, Vanessa. I'm so glad you're a part of this work.
Mm.
And Vanessa, I think your background did it for you, but do you want to quickly introduce yourself so Jen knows?
I didn't do that? What? Okay. I'm now the executive director of Parents of Public Schools of San Francisco. We're a part of a national network, and we focus on the fundamental value of San Francisco and public ed, and we're just wanting to bring some solutions to town and support our parents and our young people. So glad to not have to make the Sacramento commute every day.
Well, it's nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Vanessa.
Langston or Luz, either of you want to jump in? Luz, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I guess it's just more of a comment. My name is Luz Wayank, and I'm a parent, middle school parent in San Francisco. I guess it's just more of a comment about just, it is a follow-up comment from what Orlando said about parent involvement in all of these efforts, and how do we partner up with families to educate not only the families and caregivers, but the children as well, and also not wait until 8th grade to learn about all of these options. But how can a middle school parent right now, how can they start talking about this? When is a good time to start learning about this? Can we start in elementary school? Can we talk about all of these world language requirements, for example, in high school for our English learners, that it may be that it could be an option for them when they're in high school to opt out of sometimes of these requirements if they can prove that they have that they speak the language, they are proficient on that language, and perhaps use the time on another on a different pathway that will get the student to college and career readiness. So just I guess the follow-up comment about what the partnership looks like for the parents and caregivers, not just in high school and middle school, but also early on.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that in quite a few of our more recent work outside of California, those school districts have opted in to exactly what you're talking about, a much more community-based outreach approach that begins in elementary school. They're thinking about pathways as a middle to high school experience. Obviously, in middle school, the career focus is really different than it would be in high school, with kids learning more about many options, exploring careers, just getting little tastes of what all of that looks like, and doing exactly what you were just saying, starting to make some decisions early about what they want for themselves in high school so that they're more prepared and they have even more opportunities to explore and connect. So that's exactly the case. For getting the biggest bang out of your buck in this work. You do want to have a lot more communication and community support. The work of a community coordinator or a family engagement officer who's very closely connected to your multiple communities is critical in this approach. And usually you want that person to be working hand in hand with like a work-based learning or a business engagement coordinator.
Yeah, so as you think about like who, like you know, I mentioned that one of the structures that folks have is a broad-based coalition, thinking very holistically about who's a part of that coalition and making sure parents and families are included in that coalition is really important.
That's right. I'll also say because this is a community-based, industry-aligned approach, you're reaching out through that broad-based coalition, through pathway advisory boards and other forms of connection to your local business and industry. And that local business and industry is usually also made up of your parents and other community members. So it's another way to be thinking about when you're thinking about wrapping around support, you're wanting to include your actual local business members, the actual people who are doing the work in your community, who usually are also in your schools. It's sort of a way to continue to reach and to outreach in some non-traditional ways as well.
Curious, Langston, if you want to jump in with any questions, given your own experience and experience of your classmates around pathways.
Hi, I'm Langston Montgomery. I'm a member of the task force and a sophomore at George Washington High School in the Richmond district of San Francisco. I don't have any questions, at least that I came up with during the presentation. Thank you both for being here. The only thing that I might have a question about is how to get the teachers at these schools, especially the big schools like Washington that has like 2,000 plus students, to implement these pathways, especially for a school that already doesn't have many. Even though Wash has 2,000 kids, we only have one pathway, and that's automotive technology. So I'm I do have one question, just kind of how to get that all started, especially at a big school that only has one pathway at the moment.
Yep.
A fantastic question.
Yeah.
Jen, you want to take a crack at it?
I was going to say, you're just asking the question that is the core of my professional life. That is the work that I usually do, is specifically, usually there's a design year where we bring together a variety of people in your schools and your district to understand what is present. Like in your school, you're saying there's one pathway present, but that one pathway is not meeting the interests of every single student in your school. I'm guessing not everybody is interested to do that work, right? So there are a whole lot of students in your school who don't yet have a pathway. One of the first things we're going to want to do is understand what the kids in your school do want to do. What are the passions and interests that exist? What are the business partnerships, people who could help support you and help build this in your community? Who is actually there? And then what are the choices that could be made about making pathways that work in your school, making pathways that work in a school that's close by that some students might choose instead? What are all the constraints and possibilities that exist in your district? That planning year usually has something that we call a readiness assessment that collects all of that information. A lot of that information, it looks like, has had a start already in the work of this task force. You already know quite a bit about that, but adding some of your local labor information, some of the a little bit deeper career specific interests of your student population, that kind of work, and then seeing what the certifications are or could be for your teachers, where their own interests, where their own passions and their own qualifications lie. That's some of that early work. And then it's just digging in and doing it, honestly. Once the decisions are made, then it's just teaching everybody how to work better together and how to make better decisions for students. Honestly, that part of the work, your teachers, even though they might be a little reluctant in the beginning to start to work together more collaboratively, they usually come around. It's actually pretty exciting for them once they start believing that they actually can do it and that they can start working a little bit more closely with business and workplace. That ends up being the piece that no teacher ever wants to get rid of years down the road. They love it.
Yeah, and I would say you usually end up with like teachers who are like leading the work and really excited about it, and they start bringing other people along. And as you start to see success, you know, with the 1 or 2 academies, and other people are like, oh, I want to be a part of one, right? And then it starts to grow and develop.
That's great. I'll just tell you a quick story, Langston, that as a student you might appreciate. I was saying before that we do some of this work in Gallup, New Mexico, and in that place there were some teachers who were very unsure about whether or not this was going to work for students. At the end of the year, everybody had an exhibition of their learning. Vanessa, exactly what you were talking about, that was also true in Sacramento. All the students in the entire district shared what they had learned and the projects they came up with, and the schools were packed. Parents showed up, little sisters and brothers showed up, aunties and uncles showed up. All the teachers were just amazed, and some of them were in tears. They showed up at the beginning of this year so excited to get projects and work-based learning experiences going for students that we actually had a 2-week-long instead of a 1-week-long time to work with the teachers. So they got pretty excited by the end of it.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Let's open it back up to other task force. Everyone's had one chance to ask a question. So task force members, anyone want to ask a second one?
Trying to gather my thoughts if I'm able to go. So let me see if I can get this. So I think it was maybe Jen, maybe it was both of you. You were starting to touch on the differences between, let's say, districts that had higher achievement or higher wealth and just different demographics. So San Francisco obviously is a city that has a wide variety of demographics, and of course we look at achievement scores and they're all over the board depending on different demographics as well. How do we achieve this kind? I mean, I think this is great. This is a great model, but how do we be successful at this when we have so many people who have different needs, and also just different opinions on how we should achieve these. The question itself is not clear, so let me narrow down and just say that next week we are touching on the topic of selectivity. And I think that's where I really want to hear more about in terms of your experience. So if we do have kids who really, really want that intensive college preparation experience, what's your thoughts on is that how do we achieve that? Is it through selective types of schools and programs, or replicate something like a Lowell High School at different schools? So any thoughts that you might be able to share, any insights?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say this, but there isn't just one way to do it, and different school districts make different decisions and sometimes reverse those decisions based on what happens in the first year. We do have districts that have decided, for some of the reasons that you're listing, to build the same career focuses in all of the pathways at each school, like to sort of stick with a neighborhood schools model, for example, but to make sure that there are multiple pathways in those comprehensive schools. There are other districts faced with the same challenges that you're faced with who decide that they are going to go for schools within a school and have many different options available, and students can make those choices. There's work to be done to make sure that the college preparation is rigorous, no matter what the industry focus on is. There's also work to be done. This is both messaging and also sort of a teaching challenge to help your community understand that the industry theme isn't tracking kids into a job. It's instead trying to get kids to move toward their passion, or honestly, for some kids to even figure out what their passion might be. I mean, this is an age where most kids don't really know what they're interested in, and they might just make the decision to go along with friends who do know, to make that choice. So we want to make sure that whatever the pathway theme is, that it isn't a theme that's going to track kids, that there are some themes that are more rigorous than others, because like engineering, we're going to make sure that that's college focused, but automotive and mechanical, it doesn't need to be quite that rigorous. That ends up with the same kind of VOTEC tracking that always has been the case, and it doesn't work for this approach, especially because, automotive and mechanical right now actually has enormous amounts of tech. It's a much wider field than it might have been before, and there are plenty of ways that kids, if their academics are still keeping them in the running for a great college education, might use that interest to do some really, really remarkable things down the road, but not if they've been tracked out of those choices.
I think the other thing I would add to what Jen is saying, you'll see, I think, in the examples of the programs of study, is that opportunity. So students should have access to be able to complete A through G courses through their program of study, right? So the program of study should be designed such that students complete their A through G requirements and are, at least college eligible. So that's one thing. Like they wouldn't need, like in the certification process, like if that's got to be a bare minimum, right? That kids have access to A through G. The second is that they should be including opportunities for students to get college credit, and that could be either through dual enrollment opportunities with the local college or through AP classes, and so those can be embedded as part of the program of study as well. So again, getting away from that either or, but that all kids should be college and career ready, and that means they have access to A through G courses that make them eligible for CSU and UC, and also are on the path towards getting college credit through either successfully, completing a dual enrollment course or taking an AP test and passing that test. And so that should be a part of the program of study. And I get that San Francisco has some unique challenges around having selective school sites. There are districts that have had to grapple with that, right? And so they've taken, even within their selective schools, they still have pathways. While they have maintained their selective admissions processes because they've had to for political reasons, but they have still designed those selective schools with pathways as the core of their instructional model.
That's right. They've gone all in maybe a different version.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Vanessa?
Thank you. So one of the things I think that it's important to focus on is students who are English language learners and students who have disabilities and their access to courses within the pathway. That is something that I think we struggled at Sac City and some sites, this, you know, especially the smaller sites where they didn't have the FTE apportionment to accommodate. And I think that Luce's question, you know, I want to take that a step further to kind of think about how does it work now? I mean, I was director years ago, right, in Sac City. So how does it work now with the EL master plan and, you know, students with disabilities, and your thoughts about how they are progressing, you know, in an accelerated way where they won't, you know, they're not increasing their course load because they have to do certain other services, but they're able to still participate. I don't know if you guys have any research on that now, and I'm sorry I didn't look at the links just yet. It may be in there, but I'm just wondering about that, because, you know, I'm going to have some conversations about that master roadmap, and I think that is an opportunity, like the seal of biliteracy. You know, how does that fit in with linked learning?
Right.
And how can we really showcase that given our percentage in SFUSD of English language learners?
Yeah, I mean, you're raising sticky issues that people are navigating. I mean, those are key components that are not easy to resolve. I will say I was actually going to add, when Roneeta was talking about college credit, that credentials, workplace and civically recognized credentials of all sorts are really, really, really important in this approach. So like the seal of biliteracy or the seal of civic engagement, those would be very, very important to have front and center, to really see all of the ways that our students are capable. And making sure that there are multiple opportunities for students to demonstrate their success, no matter where that success is coming or some of the challenges that they're facing. That's really, really critical. An inclusion model is critical. Having multiple opportunities for students who are experiencing disabilities to be able to participate in some of these key experiences, exhibitions of learning, defending their portfolios, participating in work-based learning experiences and internships, really, really, really important for all students to be engaged in that, and for the leaders in your district to be critical pieces of the decision-making puzzle and the implementation puzzle, for sure.
And the thing I love about the performance assessments and portfolios and capstone projects, it gives students an ability to demonstrate mastery of skills and content knowledge in ways that they might not be able to demonstrate on, say, the CASP test, right? Like, I have loved, you know, listening to English learners talk about a subject that they researched thoroughly and present it, right? And I'm like, maybe that didn't show up on the CASP, but it's showing up right here in this room, right? Their language ability. And that's what's so powerful, I think, about this approach and the ability to integrate, you know, performance-based type assessments into the pathway approach.
I totally agree. And I think the opportunity here is twofold. One is that the master roadmap is going up for action, I think in October. And I think that's a really important conversation to have now with those leaders around what is in the master roadmap that can kind of pave a way and spark some plugs. And then the other is, unfortunately, you know, to my knowledge, San Francisco is not part of the civic engagement program with CDE. And I think that's another opportunity, given the focus on political science in San Francisco and civic engagement. So I see that we really do have a lot of sparks there. I think it's just about how do we align all of that to be cohesive and to make sure that we're really focused on the goal, right? Not like silos, but really goals, and getting the community to kind of champion those goals and showing them that in other cities that have had similar issues, there has been champions. It is possible to do this. I believe that in San Francisco, but I think we do need to really get on board with some of these other opportunities that the state of California has, and that we've been really innovative in. And, you know, other states don't have civic engagement. And I think we have some innovation here that we can offer up to the other states if we can, you know, just get some of those tweaks, you know, going. So I feel like I know I could talk to Roneeta forever, but I think Jen, you're right there with us. So
I really would love that opportunity,
Yeah,
Vanessa.
she is. Yeah.
Any other questions from task force members? If not, this is actually a good time to pivot, and Jen and Roneeta want to offer you our deepest thanks for your presentation tonight, for your engagement around the questions that task force members have had, which, by the way, been amazing questions and comments, I think, from everyone. And just really also want to thank you for the work you guys are doing out there in the field, which is very important work. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
And with that, you guys can feel free to either stay on mute, cameras off, or if you need to zip to anything else, you're welcome to go. And let me explain how the rest, we have 20 minutes left in the meeting. So here's what I want to do now. And this has been our practice in each of the other two meetings. I framed at the beginning that there was task force members, that there was three questions we asked. One, what resonates with you from tonight's conversation? What questions do you still have, and what felt missing from tonight's conversation? So what I'd like you each to do is to take just 3 or 4 minutes. I'll set a timer to write down some notes to yourself about what resonates, what feels missing, and what questions you still have. And while we're doing that, members of the public, if you want to just, if you haven't already indicated to me or Jeanette, you don't need to put your hands up, just post in the chat to us, whether if you want to give public comments, so we can get a sense of how many people are going to give public comment. So task force members, you're going to think and write for a couple minutes, then you're going to have a discussion, and then we're going to end the meeting with public comment. I will stop now, and I'll set a timer for 3 minutes. All right, so task force members, if you can be on camera, that would be great, just so I can see you. And who wants to go first? We'd love to just have you guys talk with one another about what resonates, what questions you have, what feels missing from tonight's conversation. Go ahead, Luz.
Well, just from the last week and this week, just seeing the importance of project-based learning and pathways, how important they are to getting our kids to college and career readiness, as well as the partnerships with the industries and the community. And I guess my question would be, knowing this, because this is not new information, right? So knowing this, how has the district been using this information for the, not just now, but in the recent years, how they've been using this information? That's my question.
Great, thank you. Others?
Maybe I'll build off of that. Thanks, Luz, for sharing. The resonating part, I think I get the all in, and it would be great to see. And so when I was listening to the sharing, just remembering how Lowell doesn't have any pathways, for example, I still don't know why. I don't know if I've asked that question before, but Lowell doesn't, but many of the others do, except there's variations. And so connecting with what Luz was saying, I would be interested to hear. It would have been great to have an SFUSD someone there to just talk about how they've been kind of tracking with this data that we're seeing, and where maybe SFUSD has been going along with this kind of approach, and where it differs and why. I think it would be helpful to understand that. I did like hearing about the importance of having student voice and student choice, and especially if, let's say, a certain pathway or a set of pathways doesn't fit what they're hoping for. And so it's great to see that the students have kind of this new information that's going to be coming out, which we saw a few months ago, that they can start to see, okay, each high school offers these types of maybe specialties in classes and AP classes and pathways. It'll be great to inform them. But then what if that doesn't fit? How do they get their ability to really speak to their passions and align with the choice they might want? A question that I have is, what might be some of the trade-offs of putting more resources into building stronger pathway programs and such? So I don't know if I want to go to the word negative. We saw a lot of great data. Were there any trade-offs and or opportunity costs in moving more toward this model?
Go ahead, Langston.
Thank you. Something I thought resonated a lot with me was the major increase in credits and college enrollment among African American students through linked learning. When I heard that and I saw that, I thought that was absolutely fantastic, especially in districts that's striving for equity at the center of the conversation. And I think this type of like district-wide infrastructure sounds incredibly beneficial. The only thing that I thought was missing is just a blueprint for the future. Is like, what is the city saying? Like, I want to know what other fellow students are saying. I want to see what other parents in the district think about this. And I want to see what teachers, staff, and administration thinks about this idea. So I think it's amazing listening to it.
Thank you. Vanessa, go ahead.
Yeah, I think based on my experience as a parent and an educator, we have to, I think implementing is going to be really key, especially as it relates to populations who there is disproportionality. I mean, we have disproportionality with African American students who are receiving special education services. We have disproportionality with English language learners. So I really feel that we have to try to balance some of the value and the benefits that come from pathways, even pathways that are not CTE accredited, but that are in special admissions programs. And how can these pathways be of a resource to our students? We have some of the nuggets already, we really do. And I think it's just about where and how do we, again, put this puzzle together in a way that's intentional, and that will meet the needs of these groups that have experienced disproportionality. And I think the state would love to see that as well, which is another opportunity. When I was director, we did have parents involved in the pathways, but I think that there is an opportunity to kind of further that with the community schools oriented framework and what's happening now in SFUSD, given that parents would be a part of a community school council, or if it's going to be the school site council, that are definitely appropriated in the school site council. So how do we like get those groups up as well, not only in some schools, but across all 100 and some odd schools that we have in San Francisco? That's a hard task. And to your point, I think it's going to take multiple years to do. This is not going to happen overnight. However, if the district is intentional and really works with community and parents, I think that it can happen. And we've seen great gains when I was at Sac City, both in our selective admissions programs and within our academies and pathways with disproportionate groups. So it's definitely possible. I think it's about like educating people of like, what is all this stuff, right? Because a lot of the language gets kind of complicated. But once we do that, I think folks are going to really be able to kind of be like, oh, wow. And if it's working across so many different school systems, you know, it really has, you know, a proof of concept in quotes that has some promising practices and some data behind it. So that's what resonates with me. And I've already asked my question about the implementation piece. So thank you.
Karen, did you want to offer any thoughts and reflections? Don't know if you're able to join back in. And if not, that's okay too. All right, so let me share my screen again real quick. So as has been our practice with all of the work of the task force, whether they are our formal business meetings or whether they are these virtual learning sessions, we reserve the last part of our meeting for public comment. Public comment can be offered on items that are on today's agenda, or they can be offered on anything that's in the general responsibilities of the task force. So just as a reminder to the public, according to the open meeting laws of the state, the Brown Act, task force members aren't allowed to respond to public comments during the meeting. So this is just your opportunity to share anything that you want the task force to be aware of. So we know there's been 2 people who've raised their hand at some point during the meeting, Larry and Josephine. Very quickly, but just by raising your hand or putting something in the chat, is there anybody else who wants to offer public comment this evening? I don't see anyone else, so we'll take those 2. You have 90 seconds each. So why don't we go first with Larry and then with Josephine. So Larry, you're welcome to come off of mute. And if you want, you can put your camera on, but you're certainly not obligated to.
Hello, can you hear me, Matt?
Yes, go ahead.
Great, thank you.
Can't hear you now though, Larry.
Larry, this is for Matt Kellerman and everyone else. I believe that Kelefors Education Partners shouldn't be deciding lowest merit-based enrollment policy or not, because you guys are out of the city and state and don't have any skin in the game. So in my opinion, you guys might have a hidden agenda since you are doing this for pay or you guys are like a hard hand. And also, San Francisco wants merit-based admissions at Lowell High School based on a May 2022 poll by Envold Research for the San Francisco Standard. Only 13% want lottery for Lowell. San Francisco high school students and families want merit-based admissions. Even your own task force family caregiver survey found vast majority of poll respondents support merit-based Lowell and SOTA admissions. Therefore, San Francisco Unified failure to prepare all students for high school begins in elementary school. So the focus should be in elementary school. Removing a merit-based Lowell removes a lot of our elementary and middle school students staying in San Francisco Unified to be able to attend a merit-based Lowell, which will lead to even more declining enrollment in San Francisco Unified. Thank you. This is Larry Lee. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Josephine?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kellerman. Thank you, Task Force. I really am excited about the presentation tonight that presented a career technical pathway that will empower students to gain domain expertise. So when they graduate from high school, they are ready for good jobs, ready to be contractors, licensed employees. They're ready for union jobs. And that would create a life cycle that the industries, the trades, and the unions can come back to high school to help out with these programs and build a career pathway. This is the school to union, the school to job pathway. This is exciting. What I would love to hear more is that how do we create more opportunities in every high schools that will mirror the success model of Lowell High School as well as SOTA. These two high schools are in a high demand, and then it creates a that just demonstrated that whatever they are offering, that creates the achievement model. It's really highly desired. It would be great that we can continue to create mini academy in every high school to mirror those success, so that students don't feel like that they have to go to Lowell or they're bust. And that will be better for like a diversity of needs. Everyone has different needs. Some people would want to have a load of AP classes that in the future that they are aspired to be rocket scientists or a NASA scientist. And those will be opportunities that also construct a career pathway. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that concludes those individuals who indicated that they wanted to give public comment. So we'll move on. The last thing, just as an informational item tonight, task force members, is that as you know, this is the third of four sessions that we're doing as virtual learning sessions. Next week, we're going to be focusing on the topic of selectivity. You can see the description of that there. And then as just a reminder to you to keep September 9th on your calendar, which is the date that we are, did I say the right date? I'll make sure it's right, that we are meeting all together for a full day long session to develop recommendations. You'll get a message from us tomorrow as our usual Friday communication, and we'll be posting all of the resources from tonight's session publicly on the website. And with that, I want to thank everybody and hope you all have a great evening, and thank you particularly to the task force members who are here tonight. I hope you will be ambassadors back to the rest of the task force about what you learned tonight, both in terms of what resonated with you, what your questions are, and what felt missing. We'll try to provide some answers on some of the questions that were raised, but we hope you'll be ambassadors around the topics and give your candid points of view when you're with your colleagues. Thank you very much, everybody, and good night.
Thank you. Good night.